Mr. Mohamad Momin. How you doing today, sir?
Doing all right, man. How are you?
Mohammed, I'm doing all right. I am doing all right. I kind of want to know this before we jump into anything too specific and serious. Did you ever have something that you sort of saw, and like the first time you saw it, you're like, "Oh, that's going to be successful," or "That's something that's like going to make a difference." Is there anything that ever stood out to you, like in that regard?
Oh, man. Coulda, shoulda, woulda's, those but not really that comes to mind. I do a lot of day trading stuff. So yeah, in that sense, a lot of things come to mind. But out of the ordinary, no, not really.
Sounds like there might have been one stock that got away. Is there one
There's
that you?
always that one stock that got away,
All
you
right.
know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. For me, this is, I don't know if I want to admit this publicly, but I feel like the first time I heard this song, like the first song by Avril Lavigne, like I was like 15, I saw the video come on MTV. I think it was It's Complicated was a song. I was like, that's going to be big. And I really didn't know why. And I didn't say it to anybody but my 15-year-old self. And it ended up being a pretty big song. So I guess I missed my calling as an A&R guy. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I think, I want to kind of move that over to insurance. And we have, I think we have maybe the reverse effect of that in the industry where we look to a lot of stuff and we think it's going to be the next big thing. And we're often chasing that quite a bit and we spend a lot of time on it. But yet at the end of the day, it feels like there's a lot of stuff that works, traditional stuff like just
Right.
actually doing the things. Is there something that you maybe have gone down a rabbit hole too far and found yourself like, boy, maybe I put too much stock in this one thing and I should have done this instead?
I think it's always that technology thing for me. I have that what they call that issue where you see shiny object syndrome. That's what I call it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I do have that where I have a bad habit of building and touching and creating things if I get the opportunity instead of focusing on the insurance part. So I kind of sometimes go down that rabbit hole instead of outsourcing it or saying buying a platform that kind of does everything maybe 80% of the time instead of trying to find that one perfect one and just going after it if it requires hours and hours and hours of putting time into it. I'll do it, but then I have that issue, where I'll kind of go down that rabbit hole where I shouldn't have, and it just kind of goes like, what the heck am I doing? Week into it, it's like maybe I should have gone that way.
Is there any specific rabbit hole that you found more treacherous than another?
In the insurance industry, I think technology. When it comes to technology, I think AMS was the biggest rabbit holes. AMS and CRMs, especially if you're struggling or starting off, there's always that costs versus value, where you have to kind of figure out where you need to be. And sometimes you realize I've done this in the past where I was like, man, you know what? I should have just gone with the more expensive option that came with these bells and whistles instead of trying to piecemeal this together. So I think AMS is one of the big factors I think I've kind of spent a lot of time into and to learn later on. It's like, maybe it was not worth it.
Yeah, just doing it right the first time. There's always
Yes,
something for that.
yes.
Well, I want to go over to the insurance side. Like you said, you sometimes maybe find it easier to get distracted, and focus on the technology piece. Is there something going back to like maybe even when you're just getting started where you saw that sort of success and you're like, oh, this is something I need to remember to do, that sort of like when it finally clicked for you, as you were getting going in the industry?
So I guess it all that kind of goes back to where your target audience is, where you want to be, what your niche is, right? So in my niche, I find community service or getting involved is much more easier. My approach has always been go after the big whale first, and everybody else will follow. It's like the prison mentality. So if there's a target audience or target market I'm going after, I see, okay, who's the biggest fish in that pond, and I try to go after that. That is the long approach. It does take time, it does take energy, but I think when it comes to commercial, people don't buy based on your products, but it's based on relationship, right? Who you go play golf with, who you interact with, So I try to take the long approach from that perspective. If I'm going after a market, I try to see who that person is, where are they involved, and indirectly go into that room and kind of start rubbing shoulders with different people, and then kind of get introduction from that way. So it is the long approach versus going directly and going after their sales. You know what I mean? So I try and make them friends before approaching them for the service.
So you have my interest. This is fascinating. Sort of taking sort of the winding road, if you will, to sort of that way. How do you go about identifying, like you said? I mean, sometimes they're pretty obvious, but how do you go about identifying that sort of top dog in that niche?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to your niche again. So if your niche is in IT, then you have that idea of which companies and which CEOs or the decision makers you need to go after. So I think if you have a niche, figuring out that your niche, then after you figure that niche out, when you start researching, you figure out the bigger companies, the bigger players. Then you it just kind of comes down back to who you need to go after. But I think the hardest part is to figure out your niche.
I was going to say, like, what areas do you like to play in then? Have you found certain niches more, viable than others for your agency?
For my agency is primarily convenience stores. So C stores, retail, shopping centers, and stuff like that. Obviously, within my segment of people I go after, I've figured out just by talking to one or two, say, okay, give you example. If there's a C store I see that's coming up, and I started looking into it, and this has happened kind of like, wait, I use like corporate wiki. There's another website I use. So you kind of figure out, okay, who owns this property, who owns this business, and you find out, oh, this person owns this business, and then you figure out, oh wait, he's also involved in this business, and you kind of figure out who the key players are from that, almost like the spider web, of corporations. Because if there's a website we use called Corporate Wiki, where if you put in the corporation's name, it tells you the owners or partners, and then it tells you who that partners is involved with and which corporation he has. And then you kind of figure out the pattern where who's the main player in this, who's connected with all these different corporations. So you kind of go after that person, and once you have that person, then everybody else kind of follows.
Interesting. So that's quite the little web you're weaving there as you sort of, like you said, try to unfold this whole thing. So convenience stores, retail shops. So now, usually, like you said, there's a pretty decent structure in place there. So you want to go after the businesses in the different shopping centers and things, but then you also
Right,
want to get after the person that actually owns the building, and then
right.
there might be another level or two above that. You find it getting to the top first is the easiest way for them to have that trickle down effect.
I think it's easier to go that way. It becomes more focused then, right? Say you take a retail shopping center and they have 10 stores. Well, if you take 10 businesses and you go after each 10 different owners and try to go to the top, it's harder. Versus if you're already going after the top and then you kind of work your way down, then it's much easier. I always like to throw out names in terms of when I'm acquiring new business. So I'll say, oh, wait, if I could write Joe Schmo retail shopping center, or if I could write, this huge complex, and I'm sure I can help you out. So if Joey knows Jason, and if I got Joey taken care of, then when I'm approaching Jason, say, "Hey, Jason, yeah, we have someone in common, Joey. I take care of all this with Joey." Then there's like a connection, and if they both are kind of in the same arena, in terms of, we use a prison mentality again, if they're the two top dogs in the prison, then it's like, oh wait, if he can take care of this guy, I'm sure he could take care of my needs. So it's kind of like that. It works for me. I find it beneficial, but like I said, it is the long approach, and a lot of people don't understand that.
Well, so you mentioned the long approach, and I guess we got to do this, right? So patience is the thing that comes with sort of what you're talking about here. What sort of
Right.
expectations would you want to set for somebody that might want to dabble in this sort of longer tail play for sort of that relationship? Guys just starting out, I would imagine, they might be a little more impatient to sort of wait that long. But what kind of runway do you give yourself to get in that door?
See, it's so someone starting off, it's really hard, and the reason I say that's really hard is because you're stuck between, hey, I need money now, because I'm starving, versus, hey, what is the long approach, you know? And I've heard a lot of agents say that in the past, like, hey, when I first started, I was just going after any customer. Hey, you got a pulse? All right, let's do business, you know? And it does make sense. And it's okay to do that initially, but you have to figure out your long-term 10-year, 20-year plan as well, right? So if your approach is that and you're going to continue to run with that, the problem you come across maybe 5, 10 years down the road is that, what is my niche? I don't know, because you didn't control your niche. You didn't control your client base. You didn't decide who your client's going to be, what niche you're going to go after. Your clients did, because you are taking everybody with a pulse, you know. And and then eventually you will find yourself in a market or segment that you may or may not like. It's good to kind of initially say, okay, you know what, where do I want to do 10 years from now? Where do I want to be? You know, what type of agency do I want to be? Once you figure that out, you could keep that in your back of your mind, as you kind of go through this craziness of, hey, I'll take the first customer that walks in, and eventually you'll say, okay, you know what, I got enough now. I could be a little bit more pickier with my clients that I bring on. But then you have to keep that back in your mind. It's like, hey, where do I want to be in 10 years? And I think a lot of agents who start off, they forget that. They see the dollar bills and they just keep going after it. And then 10 years down the road, they have an agency they're not really like, I'm not too happy with, or that's not the niche I want to be in, or whatever the case may be.
So I feel like there might be a good story here. Was there a moment where it sort of clicked for you in terms of like kind of stumbling onto this niche that you currently sort of like to go after, and sort of that hierarchy of like, again, like, you know, starting at the convenience store level to the person owning the building to, you know, the top of the corporation. Was there a moment where you sort of that all clicked for you? Did it like the heavens part, like to see, you know, like just in like angels would singing down,
Yeah.
like saying, "Hey, Mohammed, here you go, man."
Yes, there has been moments like that, right? So people who know me, they know where I started off. I started off as a non-standard agency, right? And a non-standard was a bucket shop, autos only, low income, month-to-month policies. That's where I started off. It was good. There's a lot of gravy, at least in Texas. There's a lot of agency fees you could charge. So you had all this cash coming in, you know, that kind of helped me got established. Eventually I realized, you know, that month to month customer is not really where I want to be. I have friends who are in that business and they are super successful. All they do is run around their Mercedes with flip-flops, t-shirts and shorts, you know, and half their employees don't know who they are, you know, and they prefer to keep it that way. That's the lifestyle they chose, and I wanted to go after a whole different market. Eventually, I got tired of that, you know, month to month stuff. I said, look, I want to build relationship. I want to have an agency that I can give to my kids, that has, you know, a potential to grow 20 years from now. You know, it will still be around. I just didn't see that in these small bucket shops, you know, where they will turn into a huge, massive agency that you give to your grandkids. That's when I started getting into the commercial side. And when I started getting into it, and I realized that, whoa, this is much nicer. I have to build a relationship, but once the relationship is done, then it's set. That customer's there for with me for 10 years or plus. Versus, you know, where this other side of the business is almost like revolving doors. 10 customers come in, you know, you hope to keep 9 or 8, you know, for a year or two while the other leave, and then 10 more come in, you know. So it was just kind of, it was too, I don't know. It was just not my style.
If you had to look back and there was one thing that you could do differently, or maybe not, is there something that is there sort of that crossroads where you were at maybe at that point where if you had a piece of information that you could give back to that person that is just starting out, is there one thing that you think would make an even bigger difference than where you are today?
Figuring out what the hell you want to do initially makes a huge difference. Recently, I just sold that non-standard agency, and that was a huge step for me because that's something I've been building for the last 18 years, right? All this time I always tell people, I felt like I'm going down the river with 1 feet in the non-standard agency and 1 feet in the preferred agency. And two different boats have two different target audience, two different processes, two different procedures, two different employees you need to hire, two different mindsets. The non-standard is heavily not service oriented, but more, hey, how much service fee I can get out of you as right now. I'm not worried about tomorrow if you stay with me. I don't care. I'm gonna milk you for what you have now. And that's the mentality you need to have, and that's not what I had. So it was almost like my brain was split in half. What I tell anybody else coming in is to figure out where you want to be. I mean, which agency you really want to have. And it kind of goes back to your personality, to be really honest with you. If you're cash money driven only, that's all that wakes you up in the middle of the night, say, hey, I want to wake up in the morning and I want to make XYZ amount of money. I don't care how it happens. I want to make XYZ amount of money. If that's what you're driven by, hey, that's your thing. That's not a problem. But if that's what you go after, then maybe the non-standard market is where you want to be. But if you're saying, hey, you know what, I want to make a difference, I want to protect, I want to have a relationship, I want to have this client that I go play golf with, on Sundays or whatever. If that's the mentality you have and that's the relationship you want to go after, then focus on that. But that is something that I figured, at a pivot point I had in my 20 almost years where I figured I had the mentality I could do both, and you can't really do both. You have to pick a side eventually. It took me too long to figure that out. If I had figured that out late before, I would have made more money now. If I had stayed with the non-standard side, not the preferred, then you know what? I would have made a lot more money because my focus was not distracted.
All right, Mohammed, I've got three more questions for you, sir. And the
Go
first
for it.
one is very simply, what's one thing you hope you never forget?
One thing that I hope I never forget, man. Wish you had emailed me these questions, man.
Not as
I'm
fun.
just
It's not
messing
as
with you.
fun. Not as fun.
No, one thing that I wish I would never forget. I learned this the hard way. When I first got into having my own agency or being an entrepreneur, I was wet behind the ears, and in the essence where I trusted people. If you told me, "Hey, Mohammed, this is the deal," I say, "Okay, this is the deal." We shake hands on it, and move on. And I learned the hard way when I bought an agency when I first got started, that that's not the case. I got hosed when I first got started. I bought into an agency when it was about 20 years ago when I first got in, and as soon as I bought it, the whole book just disappeared. And it was a franchise operation. Franchise went belly up. It was one of those things where I was wet behind the ears. I trusted people, and I never verified data. So I now it's that there's that saying, trust then verify. So now I do that quite often. That's one life lesson I've learned by getting into the businesses. Hey, you know what? I trust you. That's why we're in talking. If I didn't trust you, we wouldn't be talking. But now, after you give me all this information, I'm going to go ahead and do my own study and verify this information. And a lot of people don't like that. I had a business partner that I was looking at getting into business partner with him, and he did not appreciate that mentality. When we first met, I said, "Okay, great. Now let me go verify this. Show me this. Show me this. Show me this." Say, "What? You don't trust me?" I say, "No, no, no, no. It's not trusting. I trust you. That's why we were talking. If I didn't trust you, we wouldn't be talking. But I need to verify this information." So a lot of people don't like that, but I think that's a life lesson I've learned that I would never forget.
All right. On the other side of that, what's one thing you still have yet to learn then?
What you don't know, right? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to learn because what drives me insane is when I start talking to all these different agencies from different backgrounds is what I don't know.
Hmm.
To be really honest with you, I first out of a typical Texas association event I went to was Jason Cass's. Where I got introduced to all these different agents from all these different walks of life, from all these different part of the U.S. And I came to realize, like, oh crap, I don't know nothing. Whereas before I was like, oh shit, I know this. But then looking at how people do different type of agencies, how they run, and it's really cool to see how agency in New York is ran totally different than agency in Florida versus in California or versus in Washington. How they do it, what they do, it's just too much information. What I don't know, I still don't know. But my goal is to pick people's brains every time I meet. I always go in with the learning mentality and never oh, I know all of this because I don't think I know anything. That's why when people ask me, "Hey, you want to do a podcast?" Like, sure, but I don't know nothing. But yeah, but what I don't know, I don't know. I think I'm still learning.
All right, Mohammed. Last question to you, sir. If I were to hand you a magic wand of sorts to reshape, change, alter really any part of insurance, what is that thing? Where is it going? And what's it doing?
I would give clients more control of their data. Biggest issue I have being in the commercial side, right? Biggest issue I have is collecting sales information, collecting loss runs, and collecting all this info that I need to get a proper quote. And I'm gonna just go back to the commercial and what I know. If I had a magic wand, I would create a way, just like a credit score you have, where you could go in, pull up a report and see what you have, what you don't have, credit card wise. I would create something like that for consumers, where a business owner can go in, see all his corporation, make sure all the data is correct, update it, and when he wants a quote, he says, "Hey Joey, here's a temporary access, whatever, everything's there. Give me a quote." Everything I need is right there. This way, the data that comes into all these different agencies is the same, and eventually, that would be my magic one. I'll make it seamless to get a commercial quote, where right now, commercial quoting is where the typewriter used to be. It goes based on, Joey has a partner will tell this other agent different information. Joe will tell me different information. Then we get two different quotes with two different coverages, two different pricings. So it's like, okay, that kind of becomes crazy at times. So I would, if I had a magic wand, I'll create a system that kind of would do that and be done with.
Mohammed, this has been fantastic. I'm going to leave it right there, sir.
All right.